I have a gift for you, Picard. Put it on the main viewer. Its logs will be downloaded into the Enterprise records at the price. No price. No price. Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Battle, which is episode 8 of season 1 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the episode The Battle. So The Battle is the episode where the Enterprise meets with the Ferengi for a possible peace offering, where the Daemon Bach gives Picard his old ship, the Stargazer, which was found adrift. However, Bach proclaims that the ship that was in the battle that the Stargazer destroyed when they were forced to abandon it was a Ferengi vessel. Throughout the episode, Picard is acting strange. There's a log that indicates that Picard destroyed the Ferengi vessel without provocation, and he gets all these headaches, and it's all part of a evil plot that Bach has to use a mind control device to make Picard think that he's back on the Stargazer during the battle and that the Enterprise is the ship he's attacking. And so he goes on the Stargazer and tries to destroy the Enterprise. Riker uses his wits to outmaneuver Picard and then wakes him up to the fact that he's being controlled by this device that he destroys. And as a Ferengi put Bach under arrest for acting in a way that had nothing to do with getting profit. So, I always hated this episode. This episode, when I was growing up as a teenager, and I always talk about this a lot, how I thought of TNG back then. And this episode in particular, I always singled out as one of my least favorites of season 1. It's funny because most people sort of point out to episodes like The Naked Now or Code of Honor or Justice or other such episodes for episodes of season 1 that they really, really hate. But for me, it was this one and Lonely Among Us. And I already talked about Lonely Among Us. I actually hated this episode more than The Last Outpost. Now, granted, the Ferengi's appearance in this episode is nowhere near as goofy or ridiculous as it was in the Last Outpost, with them like jumping around going, "I gave those words to the human." Like, it's not as bad, but it's still bad. Like they just toned it down a little bit. You still have the Ferengi crouch. And you know, one thing I think is funny. How come the inside of the Ferengi vessel looks like the place where the prophets live? If you don't know what I'm referring to, if you look at the background, it was this way in The Last Outpost too. Whenever they're communicating with the Ferengi, it's just like a white background. Like, what do they live in Janet's void from The Good Place? Do they live in the place where Picard went to, where he met Q and Tapestry? The place where Benjamin Sisko talks to the prophets. There's a plain white background. I don't know, for some reason I was really noticing that. But anyway, sorry. And so they're not as goofy, but they're still goofy, and it feels like they were trying to tone the Ferengi down a bit, but they were still trying to make them like the main adversary, and it doesn't work. I think this is. Someone said there was 3 episodes that they tried to make the Ferengi the main adversary, but I don't think that's true. I think it's just these 2 episodes, and this is their last appearance in season 1. They make a very brief appearance in season 2, and then they're kind of menacing, so maybe an adversary type figure in the episode Peak Performance. But there's still, I think they abandoned making them the main adversary. then. And I think when they appear again, if I'm remembering correctly, is the third season episode, The Price. No price. I just love saying that for some reason. Every time I think, God damn it. Anyway, The Price, where I think that is the episode where they have finally, even though the Ferengi were adversarial in that episode, I think they've finally decided to give up on them becoming this, evil adversary and started to realize they're more of a ridiculous comedic force. Which I'll get to that when I get to season 3. And season 3 improved everything about TNG. But again, I'll get to that when I get to season 3. With this episode, they were still determined to make them the big enemy. So much so is that now it's stuck in canon that Picard was forced to abandon his former ship that he commanded before the Enterprise, that he was in command for 22 years. It's a long-ass time. Picard commanded the Stargazer, and the Stargazer was lost, and they were forced to abandon it because of a battle with a Ferengi ship. Wah, wah, wah. How disappointing is that? Now that's stuck in canon because of this episode. Now, I guess I should talk about the Stargazer, because I think a lot of people liked about this episode was the Stargazer. It was the introduction of the Stargazer. It was a pretty cool design, but again, as I said, I've never been much into ships myself. But honestly, I think it's because of the way that the Stargazer was used and introduced in this episode. I've never been interested in it. I've never really been interested in learning more about Picard's previous command, and whenever they bring up the Stargazer, I'm like, oh, whatever. And I think it's because of this episode, because of this shitty, dumb way. It first of all, it was lost in space to attack by a Ferengi ship. And secondly, when they do those weird Picard flashback sequences, they're just very generic. Like, they never develop any of the other characters. They just seem like generic Starfleet officers. And it's really goofy the way he's like, fire, fire, fire. And so I just never liked it. In contrast, there's Sisko's previous ship, the Saratoga, which I am fascinated by. And I think, again, that was used so much better. When we saw the Saratoga, it was in the flashback sequence in the Emissary, and that was a powerful sequence. The characters felt real, the situation felt intense, and you were, really involved with it, where here it just feels goofy and dumb. In fact, there was a novel written once, I can't remember what it was called. It was like a hard copy novel about Picard's time in the Stargazer. Maybe it was called Reunion, I don't know. But it's about him reuniting with some of his old Starfleet, officers that he served with on the Stargazer, and I have zero interest. I think I've read parts of it, though, but I was really not interested in that book. I didn't really like it. The same author who wrote that, wrote another book about Sisko and his time at the Saratoga. This one was a, paperback, so they didn't make as big of a deal. I think it was called Saratoga, if I remember correctly. And I was really interested in that. I bought the book. I was fascinated. Although, from what I could remember, it seemed like this book was just the same exact story that was done with the Picard and the Stargazer, just transferred to Sisko and the Saratoga. But anywho, so I just never been interested in the Stargazer at all. And I think it's because of this episode. So, the one thing I would say about this episode is, to me, this feels like the most syndicated episode of Season 1. Now, I talked a bit about, in other reviews, about how Season 1, Star Trek Next Generation is a syndicated show, but later seasons don't feel syndicated. Season 1 and 2 do, especially Season 1 feels very syndicated, and I'm comparing it to other shows like Xena, and there was even worse ones in the late 80s and early 90s that were just goofy and dumb, and this one really feels like it. Now, I'm sorry, B5 fans, to say this, because I do like later seasons of Babylon 5, but this episode reminded me a lot of season 1 of Babylon 5, which to me was also very syndicated and very cheesy and goofy. I'm thinking of that first season episode where those two guys like kidnap Sinclair and like torture him, and like, tell me what you know, and how goofy that is. That's what this episode reminds me of. Although I will say, I think in some ways this episode's even worse. It's just the plot of it is just something out of a cartoon. That's what I mean by these syndicated shows felt like they were just goofy, childish, like cartoons, but done in live action. And it had the goofy music. I really hate the music. It has that goofy, childish, syndicated, cartoonish feel to it. Like, and then when I say cartoon, I don't mean like a good cartoon, like, Prodigy or something. I mean like a goofy cartoon, like Scooby-Doo or something like that. I don't know. But, Scooby-Doo's not bad because it's not trying to be serious. It's trying to be goofy. I'm talking about something that's trying to be serious, but it's just as goofy. So, like Xena or Hercules or something. I couldn't stand that shit. So this is what this episode really feels like the most syndicated. Because it's got the goofy thing. First of all, I don't know. The Ferengi were not introduced very well in Last Outpost, and here they're no better. And here they're just goofy going, no, Bryce! And the guy, Bach, like, even Troy flat out says he's being deceptive, which, by the way, she shouldn't, because it was established in the previous episode that Betasaurs couldn't read Ferengi, and they totally forgot about that for this episode. Oops. But anyway, she's like, oh, he's being very deceptive. But she didn't have to, because it's fucking obvious. The guy's like, and it's yours, the gift for the hero, Maxima. Where's his mustache to twirl? It's so fucking obvious that he's the big villain who's being really deceived, devious and whatnot. And then we get scenes when there's that bald mind control device he's working at, and we see him going, turning up the volume. Try this, Picard. It's so dumb and it's so cartoonish. Where's his goddamn mustache to twirl? Where is it? They forgot to give him a mustache so he could twirl it. Anyway, and the funny thing is this episode always gave me a headache too, just because Picard gets a headache. I don't know why. When Picard's talking about having a bad headache, maybe it's because it's so terrible and I'm so bored by it. And just the dialogue in this episode, like when Bach is like turning on the device, or what I think he's at the Stargazer and he's about to send Picard to attack the Enterprise. He's like, die well, Picard! And even like the stuff with Riker, I think is kind of goofy. And then you had Wesley Crusher. God damn it. Oh my god, he's insufferable in this episode. It's funny, I was watching this review of this episode that pointed out that even Will Wheaton pointed out that this is the episode that why fans hate Wesley. I actually don't agree. I think it's The Naked Now is a better contender, and I think there's actually other episodes where he's a bit more insufferable. I think Data Lore, it's more contrived that he's the only one who knows what's going on. And even this shit, like, where no one has gone before, when he was like, I tried to tell Riker, or whatever. So this episode never actually stood out to me in that regard, but now that people pointed it out, I definitely see, like, the way he, like, goes, he's the one that figures out that it's the mind control device is the same, sort of patterns that he's detecting with the scanners that happens to match the brain scan that Crusher took, and he realizes just by glancing at his mother's results. That is really stupid. The more I think about it. So yeah, he's insufferable. That's another reason why I don't like this episode. And just the way, like, I don't know, Troy's just so useless in this episode. I think this would be an episode why people don't like her. The one thing I did like about this episode is Dr. Crusher. I think her performance has certainly make me realize why people really liked her in season 1 and wanted her to return after they got rid of her in season 2. Because it's hard for me to distinguish, because when I first started watching Next Generation, I was when season 5 was airing, so I already knew that Dr. Crusher came back. So I never had that experience of in season 2 where they brought in Pulaski and fans wanted her back, because they only had season 1 to go off of. Where when I first started, I knew her in season 4 and 3 and 5. So but at the time, people only had season 1 to go off of, and watching episodes like this, I realized that, I much prefer season 1 Crusher to Pulaski, so I can get why fans were upset about that, because in episodes like this that even suck, like, she was very, like, the way that she was, like, hounding Picard about going to bed and doing the best she could, like, I don't know, I just thought her performance was really good. Another thing that's interesting, though, is that she mentions that there's no such thing as headaches anymore, that people shouldn't be getting headaches in the 24th century, which, of course, very much stinks of Roddenberry, which I'm trying to think of specific examples, but I couldn't come up with any specific examples, but I'm pretty certain there are other incarnations of Star Trek like DS9, Voyager, or Enterprise. Well, Enterprise wouldn't count because that was before, but DS9 or Voyager, where people, or even later TNG, where people definitely got headaches. But I just can't remember any specific examples, but I'm pretty sure this is something that they forgot about or retconned. But it does make sense, though, that their medicine would become that advanced, that she specifically said that they mapped the human brain, which does sound like a huge undertaking. But anywho, so that aspect of it I did think was kind of interesting. As I said, the scene where Picard was like back in the Stargazer and seeing the ghosts of all these people, and they'd be using the Dutch jingles, and he was going, fire, 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 was so dumb. It's just so cheesy. It's just everything about this episode was cheesy, and I really, really can't stand it. And I'm sorry, but I still think this is a worse episode than The Last Outpost. As cheesy as The Last Outpost was, this one bothers me more. So anyway, I mean, the Ferengi were definitely worse than The Last Outpost, I won't deny that, but I just think overall this episode, like, the whole writing for even the Starfleet crew and the dialogue and everything about it is just dumb. Anyway, so let me thank those who support me on Patreon. Very much appreciated. It does really, really help the channel. Something I'm, very appreciated towards. So just a quick shout out to Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Manigester, Joel Valls, Alessandro Migalacio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neilhouse. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. Very much appreciated. So, we do have a singular patron comment for this episode. It's from Brandon Neilhouse, who says, The Battle. The second Ferengi episode, a slight improvement on The Last Outpost, but not nearly enough. The Ferengi are still duplicitous, and the set of the Stargazer looks incredibly cheap. Some traits are being established. 1. Tasha Yar is a terrible chief security officer. 2. Wesley Crusher has a distressing tendency to be a boy genius and save the ship every second episode. Much like Picard, this episode gives me a headache. 3. Wesley Crusher saying, "You're welcome, ladies," in an insufferable smug tone out of 10. Yeah. That was pretty maddening. So anyway, my rating for The Battle out of 10 is a 2, extremely poor. Yeah, I'm going even lower than I did for the last episode. I think this episode's worse. I think this is the most syndicated feel of season 1. Maybe not the worst episode of season 1, because I have changed my mind and say, episodes like Code of Honor is definitely worse. But yeah, I think this one feels more cheesy to me, though. It feels more syndicated. It just feels so cartoonish and dumb, and the dialogue is just horrible. I think this is one of the most horribly written, horribly directed, horrible music, horrible editing, horrible acting. Like, everything about this episode I just don't like. And it gives me a headache, too, I guess. So anyway, that is it for my review of the battle. So, coming up next on my channel, let's see here. Wednesday will be my review for Marvel's Secret Invasion Season 1. Thursday will be my review for the newest episode of Strange New Worlds. And then Saturday we'll be back for another Next Generation episode review for Hyde and Q. And then the following Monday, another new TNG review for Haven. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to keep an eye out for that as I continuing to cover Next Generation and Strange New Worlds, and also many other videos and many other Star Trek shows and other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.